leather print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Janice Marie Hunt, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Sunday, March 22nd, 2026 issue of the New York Times business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. With interest, $450 billion. The rise of artificial intelligence has fueled the stock market and the U.S. economy, but it has also contributed to the country's trade deficit. Imports of computers, semiconductors, and computer accessories topped $450 billion over the past year. The overall trade deficit hit a record of $1.2 trillion in 2025, while the trade deficit with Taiwan, a major source of advanced AI semiconductors, roughly doubled to $146 billion. Imports overall were $3.4 trillion last year. Though President Trump has sought to reduce the trade deficit in part by imposing punishing tariffs on trading partners, heavy imports of such electronics, which are largely spared from tariffs, are likely to continue. Unless there's a shock that reduces planned investment, it is hard to see how this doesn't result in a larger U.S. trade deficit in 2026, Brad Setzer, a senior fellow of the Council on Foreign Relations, told the New York Times' Anna Swanson. The computers and chips are critical to the AI data centers that are rapidly being built across the country. More than 35 gigawatts of data center capacity is under construction in North America, comparable to the annual electricity consumption of Britain or Italy, according to the property from JLL. Both the Biden and Trump administrations have tried to expand domestic production of computers and AI chips, but that effort is expected to take years. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has called for moving 40% of Taiwan's chip production to the United States within 3 years, a goal that the Taiwanese officials have called impossible. At a recent news conference, Jensen Huang, the chief executive of NVIDIA, the leading AI chip maker, said such a move would be very challenging in the near term. So far this year, the stocks were down. S&P 500 5.0%. Mortgage rates were up. Bankrate.com 30-year fixed 6.39%. Jobless claims were down. 4-week moving average 3.8%. Honestly, when I don't have agents running, I feel like this Agus, a 28-year-old startup founder who said he ran 2 companies using AI agents. She's managed to make the place punk rock again. A contributing editor at Wired on the magazine's editor, Katie Drummond. We're not putting things on stop until we get more clarity. The global head of mergers and acquisitions at Goldman Sachs on the deal landscape. Strategies, Jeff Sommer. The best we should hope for from the Fed, nothing. The Federal Reserve didn't lower interest rates at its meeting last week. With a war driving up energy prices, the markets will need to hope that the Fed doesn't do so in the months ahead, because a rate cut would be a sign that the economy is in deep distress. It's true that at their current level, interest rates aren't providing much, if any, stimulus to the economy, which is looking vulnerable. U.S. employers cut more jobs than they created in February. Overall economic growth has been weak, and inflation was higher than anyone would desire, even before the state, even before the start of the U.S. and Israeli attacks on Iran. The stock market has stalled too. All things being equal, lower interest rates could provide a welcome boost. But the double whammy of the war in Iran and the Trump administration's revived tariffs are putting upward pressure on prices, both in the United States and the rest of the world. The oil shock set off by Tehran's retaliatory strikes in the Persian Gulf region, especially in the Strait of Hormuz, and is already beginning to have painful effects. Under these circumstances, the Fed has little real choice. It projected one more rate cut later in 2026, but it has to wait to see how high prices will go, and the answer still isn't clear. The thing I really want to emphasize is that nobody knows. Jerome H. Powell, the Fed chair, said in a news conference on Wednesday. Since the start of the war, energy prices, including those of oil, gasoline, and liquefied natural gas, have been rising sharply. A range of other global commodity prices have also moved higher since the start of the war in the Gulf. Fertilizer, which is critical for farming and food security, has become more expensive to Asian countries are particularly hard hit by the oil cutoff and European countries by the shortage of liquefied natural gas. These costs will ripple through the global economy in coming weeks, and while the United States, a major energy producer, is more insulated than many countries, it is still imperiled for the Fed cutting interest rates while inflation is accelerating would be a dangerous gambit. We don't yet know how long the war in Iran and the mounting oil shock will last. Oil prices, already up more than 45% this month, could easily climb much higher. Recall what happened after Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. The price of Brent crude jumped above $120 a barrel, but not until June. The price at the pump for a gallon of unleaded gasoline exceeded $5 that month, according to AAA, and the rate of inflation in the United States, as measured by the Consumer Price Index, rose above 9%. That was the highest rate of inflation in the country since the oil shocks of the 1970s and the 1980s. We're not near those levels now, and the global economy has become much less oil dependent year by year, but one-fifth of the world's oil and a substantial amount of natural gas normally flow through the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran can continue to restrict tariffs through that waterway for several months, energy prices are likely to keep rising. That could lead to red hot inflation. In the estimation of JP Morgan researchers, if Brent crude, currently about $103 a barrel, climbs above $125 a barrel and remains there for weeks or months, the economy would be in a real danger zone. This month, government bond yields have already risen sharply in a range of countries, with the 10-year U.S. Treasury note hovering below 4.3%, up from just under 4% before the war. The continuing uncertainty surrounding Mr. Trump's tariffs isn't helping either, not at all. Further, inflationary effects unexpected, but estimating how much is difficult when the tariff levels themselves are still up in the air. Administration studies court battles and international negotiations are likely to shift these taxes on imports frequently for a second year. Given these threats, the world's central bank, including the Fed, could be inclined to keep monetary policy tilted in a hawkish direction. They might have to raise rates if the war unleashes inflation fears enough to make people expect prices to rise quickly for years to come. In economic jargon, this would mean that inflation expectations are becoming unanchored. Once rapidly rising prices are widely anticipated in a society, a vicious self perpetuating cycle can set in, one that can be excruciatingly difficult to stop. Ever since Paul A. Volcker ran the Fed from August 1979 through August 1987, heading off a hardening of inflation expectations has been a fundamental concern of central bankers. Unfortunately, inflation isn't the only threat the economy faces. There's another problem associated with sharply rising oil prices: recession. Recession is once again a serious threat, Mark Zandi, chief economics at Moody's Analytics, wrote last week. Even before the recent disconcerting events in the Middle East, he said, the risk of a recession had risen to roughly 50-50 according to an economic model run by his firm. The oil shock only increases the odds, he said. Forecasting recessions is difficult, and I'm not about to try. There has not been one in the United States since the end of the pandemic recession in April 2020, though various indicators have signaled recession repeatedly. There may be no big inflation surge this time and no recession. It's quite possible that the war in Iran will end soon. That normally tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz will resume and prices will subside. But we just don't know. Surging costs typically have major political implications. The inflationary spiral associated with the war in Ukraine contributed to a sharp decline in the popularity of former President Joseph R. Biden Jr. Affordability is already a political issue in the United States, and the tariffs and the war in Iran could make it an acute one in a national election year. This isn't something the Fed can completely ignore. Yet, the central bank, still led by Jerome H. Powell, is struggling to maintain its independence in the face of demands by President Trump that it slash interest rates. Mr. Powell's term as Fed chair ends on May 15th, but Kevin Warsh, who has been nominated by President Trump as Mr. Powell's successor, may not be confirmed by the Senate by that date. Mr. Powell said on Wednesday that he expected to continue as Fed chair temporarily if that happened. So the Fed is in a tough position. It is difficult to see how an independent central bank facing an inflation threat could lower interest rates now. But a recession or financial meltdown would change that calculus immediately. As I've been warning for weeks, the risks for investors have risen sharply during the Trump administration. Given the challenges facing the Fed, a quiet period without headlines or fireworks may be the best the market can hope for. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Work friend Max Reed. Navigating office issues, stay in your lane. Question. My company has an employee who's intelligent and hardworking. He is a logistics specialist and has no trouble with the day to day work of handling shipments. The problem is with the other part of his job, which involves classifying products in many different ways for transportation purposes. He is slow to complete these tasks and talks of getting stuck. The issues he gets stuck on are often minor, as in many cases there is more than one reasonable classification. He rarely asks for guidance when he has a problem. He simply stops. His desk is a total mess of papers. I suspect he has a form of ADHD. I have seen problems like this with family members, and they have benefited from formal treatment. As an employer, how can I reach out to him and tell him he needs help? This would be covered by our health insurance. Anonymous. Let me get to the most important point first. Do not tell your employee that you think he has ADHD. You are not a doctor. You are not his doctor. You do not have the diagnostic expertise or sufficient knowledge of your employee's life to make this assessment, and even if you did, it would be wildly unprofessional and invasive. And even if this appeal to professional considerations doesn't move you, consider the legal liability. If you tell this employee you think he has a disability and later fire him, you are leaving yourself open to an expensive lawsuit. It's for this reason that the best thing here is to talk to him directly about the behaviors and outcomes that are creating problems, rather than some root psychological cause. Ask him what causes him to get stuck on classifications and what's stopping him from asking for guidance. Then see if he has any suggestions for structural solutions, new policies, or accommodations that could help him speed up his completions. These accommodations might be helpful for other employees as well. He's probably not the only worker who's been confused by classification ambiguity and a decision framework or flow chart with explicit instructions for outliers who could make everyone's life a little better. Finally, as a separate matter, you could make it a policy to periodically remind all your employees of your benefits package and encourage them to see doctors regularly and seek professional help if they're finding personal problems affecting their work. This is another policy that will most likely benefit all of your employees and allow you to remain their boss rather than their psychiatrist. Their affair, my problem. I work on a team of 3 people at a nonprofit. I'm relatively new and I had struggles with my original 2 colleagues from the start. They both let me know that I wasn't their top pick for the job and prevented me from working on any projects with them. I raised concerns with management repeatedly over the past year, and while they have recognized the situation is not ideal, they haven't wanted to intercede. What's more, I have long suspected that these colleagues were having an affair, a suspicion that I kept to myself. Recently, in an effort to promote better relations between us, management sent us and another colleague on a work trip to Hawaii. This colleague and I discovered that the other 2 were spending large amounts of time not working, and we accidentally, when stopping by one of their condos for a planned dinner, overheard them clearly having sex. This became one of many other signs of their physical intimacy that we witnessed on the trip. When we got back to work, my colleague and I chose to report our suspicion that they had been using company funds to pay for romantic getaways. Management did a broader investigation and found many months of financial problems relating to misuse of work funds. As a result, one of my colleagues was fired. The other, who was a long-standing, much beloved employee, remains employed but is extremely angry. Assuming she remains at the company, I would be expected to work with her. I believe she blames me for everything that has happened. We have no HR department, and I am at a loss for how to navigate this relationship. Any advice? Anonymous. I wouldn't want to minimize an obviously stressful situation, but I hope you can recognize the silver lining here. Your vexing workplace drama is juicy. Still, there's obviously more to do than just laugh about it. In the absence of an HR department, a good rule of thumb for dealing with a hostile colleague is document everything. By document everything, I mean you should maintain both an email correspondence with her that can act as a written reference to any verbal agreements and a record of any difficult interactions with this colleague. It doesn't need to be a detailed diary with elaborate descriptions, just a running log with dates, times, witnesses, and a brief record of what was said. Keep notes for your movie script in a separate file. You may never need to refer to this documentation, but in the event her hostility tips into retaliation or harassment, you'll want it. Before it gets to the point of conflict, though, you should also open up a line of communication with your bosses. You say they haven't wanted to intercede in the past, and while I can be sympathetic to their position, insofar as I too am sometimes lazy and avoidant, it's a derecognition of management duty for them to have allowed this kind of noxious dynamic to develop. At the very least, they should be providing written expectations for professional workplace conduct and a blanket warning against retaliation. But if you can't make them do their jobs, you can at least make them define yours. Asking for structure from your bosses seems like a reasonable request in this situation, as would a policy of regular check ins to flag issues as they arise. All of this would help establish boundaries before you even need to strategize that in person interaction with a person who potentially hates you. If you've secured anonymity and clarity from your bosses and are maintaining your own records, you can treat your colleague the way you treat any different person who has no real power over you, with kid gloves and at a distance. Be unfailingly polite, clear, and direct, but don't try to repair the relationship or ingratiate yourself. And most important, don't take any bait that's offered to you. At the same time, I might start quietly I might start to quietly send my resume around other employers. The fact that your bosses were already declining to mediate your dysfunctional workplace relationships even before the Hawaii incident working screenplay title and are continuing to do so after an offense significant enough to get someone fired should not fill you with confidence that they will have your back when the time comes. When your Apple Watch becomes an office taskmaster, wearable tech that tracks data like heart rate variability is telling people how to perform. Dr. Ravi Solanki earned a medical degree and PhD at Cambridge University and worked in an intensive care unit during the pandemic. But it wasn't until last year, not long after moving to the San Francisco Bay Area for the artificial intelligence company he runs, that he paid attention to heart rate variability, or HRV. Suddenly, he was surrounded by techies and began wearing a wristband that tracks health and fitness data per the local custom. He learned that HRV, basically a measure of how uneven your heart rate is correlated with brain and body health and become preoccupied with improving his. On his roughly 30 member team, a lot of people have whoops, Dr. Solanki said, referring to the wristband. As a group, we compare them. It's quite fun, quite unifying as well. We help each other. What can we do to help performance on HRV? As wearable devices like Fitbits and Apple Watches proliferated over the past decade or two, many people began calibrating their health and wellness regimens to improve how their bodies function. But in recent years, more and more gadget geeks have focused such biohacking efforts on their performance, not just at the gym, but at the office as well. The once essential quest for immortality is becoming a fixture of the 9 to 5 hustle. The trend has spawned a cottage industry of coaches and gurus who train white collar workers to raise their HRV or help companies train employees to boost theirs. Software makers have created dashboards that allow a company's HRV coach to track and analyze employees' data and to share team wide averages with company managers. Matt Bennett, a founder of Optimal HRV, which makes one such dashboard, said subscriptions to the service had increased more than tenfold since 2020 to more than 4,000. Increasingly, it seems white collar workers who want to get ahead are obsessing over their HRV. Tim Ferriss, an influencer and the author of The 4 Hour Work Week, has said he first learned about HRV from a friend who works with a lot of the best performing investors in the finance world, he added. They all use HRV. Should they? Great question. Workplace fit workplace fitness tracking. To the uninitiated, having a more variable heart rate may seem like a looming disease, a sensation you recall just before passing out and waking up strapped to a gurney. In fact, greater heart rate variability, a heart that beats not every second on the dot, but after, say, 1.1 seconds, and then 1.05 seconds, then 0.95, then 1, tends to reflect psychological resilience. A person with higher HRV can recover his or her equilibrium more quickly after being started than a person with a low variability. HRV is also a fairly reliable barometer of overall health. It will typically drop when someone is eating or sleeping poorly or overtaxing the body. Heart arrhythmia, a potentially serious medical condition, can express itself in similar ways, but its changes in heart rate tend to be more erratic. While biohacking has long been popular in the tech world, a growing number of performance optimizers appear to work in law, marketing, and other fields. Many people who responded to a recent New York Times questionnaire said they had gotten into measuring HRV through their interest in health and wellness. Dr. Scott Bronstein, the chief medical officer of Solace Health, which provides a concierge service for urgent health care, said that readings measured during sleep were most accurate and that factors like food intake or exercise influence readings taken during the day. For some white collar workers, the sensitivity of HRV is precisely its allure. When Pete Zales started making presentations to senior executives at the large telecom company where he worked, the anxiety would make him lightheaded. An avid runner and cyclist, he decided to enlist his wearables to fix the problem. We track workouts and races in order to analyze biometrics, he wrote by email. I realized I could do the same for my professional performances. He began to monitor his HRV before and after presentations, then experimented with ways to make sure it was relatively high going in and didn't plummet while he spoke. How much does my HRV drop during the presentation today versus a year ago, versus 2 years? He said in an interview. He actually settled on a regimen of exercising moderately in the morning of his presentations and staying on his feet beforehand to burn off nervous energy. Still, he ultimately hopes to do something even more valuable with the data from his wearables. Feed it into an AI tools that can reveal deeper truths and predictive guidance, a path to a better health. To help clients raise their HRV, some consultants train them to breathe at a slow, steady rate known as the resonance frequency for several minutes a day. The resonance frequency varies from person to person, said Ina Kazan, a clinical and performance psychologist at Harvard Medical School, but generally means inhaling and exhaling 3.5 to 7 times a minute. A lawyer at a financial firm who did not want to draw attention to her employer said she had raised her HRV by working on her breathing with Dr. Kazan and felt it had sharpened her mental acuity. This is in line with studies indicating that these techniques can improve executive function and conditions like depression, though some of the research is at an early stage or in need of more rigor. Other expert questions whether it makes sense to focus directly on improving HRV as opposed to emphasizing overall health and resilience to stress. We could starve ourselves and our heart rate would be low. HRV would be high, said Marco Altini, a data scientist who focuses on sociology. But that would not be a good condition. Dr. Altini nonetheless agrees that breathing techniques can help reduce anxiety. Whatever the case, such HRV coaching is becoming a lucrative business with clients in technology, finances, large corporations, and the front office of professional sports teams. Jay Wiles, a performance psychologist who began his career working with military personnel and veterans, said his firm, Thrive, had 20 to 40 organizations as clients at a time. It charges anywhere from $15,000 for a 3-month low touch engagement that consists of initial training and periodic feedback to 6-figure annual retainers for clients who want more hand holding. Thrive has contracts like this with a large sports apparel company and a global consulting firm, each with tens of thousands of employees, he said. Dr. Wiles said the improvement in their HRV data was reassuring to hard-headed rationalists who might not be receptive to other forms of therapy. It goes from this woo-woo talking about stuff to look at what's happening within your nervous systems, he said. Still, one doesn't have to look far to find evidence of woo-woo in the HRV industrial complex, or at least over exuberance. On a podcast put on by Whoop, the maker of the wristband, Dr. Wiles enthused there's no possible way we can self-snake oil on heart rate variability biofeedback because there's so much research to back it up. Frizziness in the body. In December, Leah Legos, a performance psychologist and HRV specialist, mailed me a laptop and 2 sensors so she could find my resonance, breathing, frequency, and walk me through the virtues of breathing at the rate for 15 minutes twice a day. Dr. Legos said she worked with professional athletes, corporate executives, hedge fund managers, and law firm partners, among others. In her view, highly skilled white-collar workers are biologically athletes who should strive to optimize their cognitive self And she said regular breathing would work could make this happen more consistently. Maybe your peak, maybe your peak you is from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., she said. But then this gives you another 2 or 3 hours. After she calculated my baseline HRV, she set up an electronic pacer on the laptop monitor that alternated between 4 and 6 second intervals. She instructed me to breathe in through my nose during the shorter interval and out through my mouth during the longer one. When we finished, my HRV had increased substantially according to the numbers on the screen. Most people notice the activity of their minds, the clarity. That's usually the first sign of resonance, she told me. Another is that people say that they feel a fizziness in their body. I had to admit that I felt kind of a fizzy. Still, it can be hard not to wonder if all the biohacking has become excessive. Among the people I spoke with, HRV was often just the tip of the iceberg. Some said they had multiple devices, watches, rings, wristbands, continuous glucose monitors, or that they tried to optimize their readings as if playing a video game. Or they used them to determine what time of day they should do their most taxing work and rearrange their schedules accordingly. Michelle Cicle, an executive assistant at a financial services company, said she used an infrared sauna and red light to help improve her HRV, which she tracks with an Apple Watch. She said she had decided to limit her biohacking to a handful of rituals after seeing friends overdo it. I've watched people go insane from this, she said. Insane? For those who have anxiety, and really who among us doesn't, monitoring the watches and rings can become a compulsion. What this technology has done is it become an addiction for them, a kind of reassurance seeking behavior, said Bonnie Zucker, a clinical psychologist in Los Angeles who specializes in health anxiety and panic disorder. Dr. Zucker said checking devices was not unlike repeatedly washing hands or making sure a door is locked. It may briefly soothe but can quickly become pathological. And all of this is happening as artificial intelligence moves in on white collar jobs, which may only heighten the anxiety to perform better at work. A handful of the biohackers I spoke with worked in AI or, like Mrs. Zales, were keenly aware of its rapid improvement. Perhaps in our race to stay ahead of the machines, it can be tempting to try to make ourselves more and more like them. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. With $500 million at stake, fighting over the question, is this a real will? A mysterious document has triggered a battle over the state of Tony Hsieh, the former Zappos chief. It landed at a law firm in Reno, Nevada last March. A mundane-looking piece of priority mail that cost $10.10 to ship. But it soon unleashed the sort of multi-million-dollar havoc usually associated with town-flattening tornadoes. Inside was a document many instead insisted did not exist. The last will and testament of Tony Hsieh. The dimpled and charismatic chief executive of Zappos had died in 2020 at the age of 46 from smoke inhalation injuries sustained in a fire. A forensic psychiatrist later concluded that he had lived the last months of his life in a state of drug induced psychosis, spending his immense fortune at a manic pace. Many of his plans were grand to the point of derangement. He dreamed up Country Zero, a hybrid of theme park and nation state to build on his ranch in Park City, Utah. It would be a place with its own time zone, filled with hot air balloons and run on seashell based barter economy. He believed the project, which never broke ground, would draw billions of people in a matter of months and usher in world peace. Once word gets out, he told underlines, every sunrise is owned by us. Because Shay, Hsieh, is pronounced Shay. Okay, that's good that I found that out. Died unmarried and childless and without a will in sight. His entire $500 million estate was headed for his parents, Richard and Judy Shay. Then the surprise will, as the Wall Street Journal called it, arrived at the Reno offices of the law firm of McDonald Carano. The document, 7 type pages dated March 13, 2015, spread the money in ways that were both conventional. $3 million went to Harvard, Shay's alma mater, and utterly baffling. Something called the Tony Shay Litwell Irrevocable Trust would receive $50 million in addition to money from the sale of 4 parcels of real estate. Exactly who would profit from this immense infusion of cash and assets is still unclear. No record of a trust by that name has been found. The will's origins are every bit as perplexing. It came with a letter explaining that it had been discovered in February of last year among the personal belongings of one P.I.R. Mohammed, purportedly a 91-year-old resident of Pakistan who, the letter noted, had died of Alzheimer's, apparently unaware of Shay's passing. The Shay's friends and family, everything about that story sounded cockamamie. He didn't know a P.I.R. Mohammed, they said, or have any connections to Pakistan. And the 4 others who signed and witnessed the will, supposedly at Shay's home in Las Vegas, seem to have vanished. Or they are fictional. Same for the man who apparently mailed the document to Reno, identified in court filings as Kashif Singh and said to be P.I.R. Mohammed's grandson. Since March of last year, not a peep. The will named 2 Nevada lawyers as co-executors, Robert Armstrong of McDonald Carano and Mark E. Ferrero of Greenberg Traurig. Neither knew Shay, and they were not obligated by law to champion the will. But it appeared to meet statutory requirements, and by June they had petitioned the court to validate it and remove Richard Shay as the state's administrator. The elder Shay was not about to go quietly, a development the will seemed to anticipate. It contained a brutal no contest clause stipulating that if any members of the Shay family challenged it, Tony's parents and his brothers, Andrew and David Shay, would get nothing. By accepting the will, they would get whatever was left after all the bequest. If this was intended to quash the Shay's willingness to brawl, it did not work. Scams come in all shapes and sizes, lawyers for Richard Shay wrote in a court filing in December. In this case, the scam is in the form of a document being touted as the purported will of Anthony Tony Shay. Despite its obvious peculiarities, the will cleared Nevada's legal threshold for serious consideration, which turns out to be surprisingly low. Judge Gloria Sturman of the 8th Judicial District Court in Las Vegas described the will as just odd, but she added that doesn't mean it's not valid. In late January, she announced that the only way to resolve this dispute was through a full on court battle, aka will contest. It was the opening whistle of a FRAC shaping up as the strangest probate case since the 1976 death of Howard Hughes, another Las Vegas based mogul, an eccentric who died intest without a spouse or children. It took 34 years to litigate the 40 wills eventually lobbied at the court in the Hughes matter, but at least it was clear who did the lobbying. Barring a settlement, the Shea case could easily last for years and cost millions of dollars in legal fees. For now, the will is the most intriguing actor in this drama, a character that touted on stage wearing a gaudy disguise and speaking in gibberish, only to flop on the floor and refuse another word. Men and women in suits have since been waving their hands and arguing. What is this? What is this? Where did it come from? And what is this production anyway, a tragedy or a farce? Tony's Corner. Shea told the story of his life in Delivering Happiness, a 2010 memoir and manifesto that preached a smiley-faced version of capitalism centered on employee joy and customer wow. He was born in Illinois to Taiwanese immigrants, a father who worked as an engineer at Chevron, and a mother who is a clinical psychologist. A few years out of college, he joined the internet's first crop of whiz kid tycoons when Microsoft paid $265 million for a Banner, a startup he had co-founded. In 1999, he became the chief executive of ShoeSite.com, which he's transformed into the hugely successful Zappos, later sold to Amazon for $1.2 billion. He stayed on as chief executive and in 2013 moved the company into the old Las Vegas City Hall, a few miles from the upmarket strip. He would eventually pour $350 million of his own wealth into the Downtown Project, now DTP companies, buying blighted properties and treating the neighborhood like a startup. Bars and motels were revived. Entrepreneurs were wooed with seed money and cheap rent. He lived in an Airstream trailer near the company's headquarters with an Alpaca and dozens of friends and colleagues in their own trailers. He was an unlikely patron for an experiment in urban utopia. Shea was shy, awkward, and dependent on the medicinal tasting liqueur Fernet Branca, which became the house pour of his circle. He drank throughout the day and into the night, holding meetings in bars, including one in the El Cortez Hotel and Casino where Tony's Corner now bears a plaque. Tony used alcohol as a social lubricant for himself, to kind of dumb himself down to be able to vibrate on the level of folks like myself and others, said Tyler Williams, a friend and former Zappos employee. It felt like he kind of needed to get some drinks to normalize. The two men were together at Burning Man in the late 2019, where Shea first tried ketamine, an anesthetic also used in carefully controlled settings for depression. Shea began snorting it consistently and slid into delusion. He said he could grow to 7 feet tall, live without oxygen, and download taekwondo skills. Friends steered him into a rehab center in Utah, but he left after 2 weeks and started using drugs again. Wow. Holed up in Park City during the pandemic, Shea conceived another widely ambiguous community full of startups and parties, a vision detailed in Happy at Any Cost, a biography of Shea by Kirsten Grind, now a reporter at the New York Times and Catherine Sayre, published in 2022. He spent an estimated $50 million to $70 million on 10 to 20 properties, including a 17,000 square foot mansion. Friends who tried to curb his drug habit were banished at Buskills. He started giving people money to not bring up drugs, to do mental jobs or do nothing at all. Just be around, said Ryan Doherty, a friend and Las Vegas nightlife entrepreneur. I wouldn't call these people enablers. They were more like opportunists. The walls of his Utah mansion were quickly covered with thousands of post-it notes, many containing barely legible contracts in IOUs. He became emaciated and increasingly unhinged, living in a room littered with broken glass and rotting food. He talked about buying all the submarines on Earth and detonating them in pairs to generate $600 million in diamonds. Black clad security guards kept worried friends and family away. Inside the perimeter was a non-stop open bar with music and pyrotechnics. After months of this noisy circus, Shay flew to New London, Connecticut, in the fall of 2020 to stay at the home of his girlfriend, Rachel Brown. After an argument, he moved into a small pool-sized shed. Surveillance footage showed him locking himself in around 3 a.m. on November 18th, soon after a fire broke out that a medical examiner would rule an accident. He died in a hospital 9 days later. Wow. Significant bequests. The next month, Tony's father, Richard, and his brother, Andrew, were appointed administrators of the estate and began a fruitless search for a will. The estate was quickly embroiled in more than a dozen creditors' claims, and it filed lawsuits to recover millions that Shay had committed to spend during his Park City days. A large IRS tax bill also loomed. The estate would soon sell millions in assets. All of this activity kept a team of lawyers busy. When that priority mail envelope turned up in Reno in March of last year, they got even busier. Armstrong and Ferraro, the lawyers named in the will, were quite surprised to learn they had been chosen for the job, they said in a court filing, but they argued that the will met Nevada's validity standards. It was signed by Shay and at least 2 witnesses, missing or not. Armstrong and Ferraro declined to comment. To a layman's eyes, the document seems a bit quirky, but is filed with plausible enough legalists and plenty of accurate details. Also, there are lines like, I want my beneficiaries to live in the wild, which was either written by Shay or someone doing a pretty good impersonations of him. Richard Shay was less impressed by this time. He was running the estate alone. Andrew Shay had stepped down in 2022 with no explanation. In a December filing, Richard called the will a forgery and hired a bunch of experts to back up their opinion. A University of Cambridge Linguistics professor concluded that the language style and patterns of speech in the will are indicative of South Asian English, such as Indian and Pakistan English. A probate lawyer noted that the will had its share of clunkers, phrases like significant bequests and money owed be paid. Another expert concluded that Shay's signature was a fake. The will also misspells his middle name. It's a Chiahua, not Chiahua. Attempts to locate any record of the Tony Shay Little Wild Irrevocable Trust have so far come to nothing, as have attempts to find other trusts named in the will. The actual signing of the will raises questions too. On the day in 2015 that it supposedly happened, Shay's daily login is crammed with calls and meetings with people named Dave, Rob, Fred, and others, and the delivery of a Delaware at the Zappos headquarters. There's no mention of PIR Muhammad or any of the four witnesses Mir Gorham, William Cott, Ishrat Dodd, and Nayab Shah. These witnesses have remained untraceable. William Gott appears to be a fictional person fabricated for the purpose of committing this fraud. Lawyers for the estate wrote in a filing, three of the witnesses left residential Las Vegas addresses under their signatures on the will. When landlords of those properties were subpoenaed by the estate, all provided declarations stating that they had no records of the punitive witnesses over having lived there. Wow. Of course, there's no way to prove that a person does not exist. Eli Segal, a reporter for the Las Vegas Review Journal, understood this conundrum when he began his quest to find anyone connected to the will. Segal covers real estate in a city that has attracted its share of oddballs and criminals, and he's highly skilled at locating people who don't want to be found. Over dinner at a downtown Vegas burger joint, he told me that he had started hunting for names on the will the day after after it was filed in April of last year. I didn't think twice about the search initially, he said. You come across names you've never heard of the time in every story. Finding these people soon started to feel like a maddening chore. Ooh. It combined property records, professional licensing, databases, corporate and bar rolls, voter rolls, social media, and court documents to different jurisdictions and states. He found a few people in the United States named Kashif Singh, but none of them had anything to do with Shay. He found one man named P.I.R. Muhammad who had lived in Austin, Texas, but could only locate a former neighbor who knew nothing about him. How could six people live so leave? How could six people? How is it that six people leave so little evidence of their lives? Segal would plop on his sofa every evening and type on his laptop well into the night. He wrote a bunch of richly detailed stories about the will without nailing down who drafted, witnessed, or mailed it. Lawyers for the will have produced little more. One of their court filings includes an image of the death certificate for someone named P.I.R. Muhammad, but almost everything about the document, other than the name, year of birth, and year of death, and the government, Pakistan, was blurred out. Representatives for the lawyers would not comment on where that document came from and who did the blurring. Armstrong said in a court filing that soon after the will arrived, his office got a phone call from a gentleman identifying himself as Kashif Singh. Whether Armstrong actually spoke to Singh is not mentioned. The elusive Singh also mailed 2 copies of the will to the Las Vegas courthouse. One arrived with a return address that turned out to be a satellite building of the courthouse itself. The other had this return address, 1621 Central Avenue, Wyoming, an office building and mail drop hub for LLCs in that privacy-friendly state. Adding to the mysterious, the envelope was postmarked in Fairless Hills, Pennsylvania. Wow. A ghost town. In January, Judge Sturman added Armstrong and Ferraro as special administrators of the estate. They and the lawyers they have hired to handle the probate war can now submit their fees to the judge, which, if approved, will be paid by the estate. Expensive and seasoned lawyers are now toiling on